The number is $34 trillion. Pause for a moment. 34 trillion. It's a number so vast, so abstract, it stops feeling real. But this is the official national debt of the United States. An obligation so great it would take every American citizen over $100,000 just to erase the current slate. The debt is compounding faster than we can speak its name, increasing by trillions in mere months. It's a terrifying, unprecedented figure that hangs over every tax payment, every retirement account, and every promise made about your future. Now, you retold this is simply the cost of doing business, the price of a global superpower managing the world. They use words like sustainable or manageable. They say, don't worry, the US dollar is the global reserve currency. This time is different, but history has a brutal, consistent way of exposing that exact phrase as the last illusion before an inevitable collapse. If you believe that the financial structure supporting the United States is invulnerable, I need you to commit to watching the next minutes, because what you are living through right now is not a modern economic problem. It is the exact same catastrophic ancient mistake that brought down the greatest empire the world had ever known, and we are repeating it at machine speed. The current crisis is not one of budget disagreements. It is a fundamental flaw in the fabric of an imperial system that learned how to print its way out of trouble, and in doing so signed its own death warrant. And here is the call to action to prove I am right. Before you decide this is just doom and gloom, ask yourself one question. Do you honestly believe your savings, your wages, and your future purchasing power are more secure today than they were 10 years ago? If the answer is no, then subscribe and hit the notification bell. We are about to uncover the secret history of debt that explains the daily financial anxiety you feel right now. To understand the fate of the dollar, we must first go back 2,000 years. The Roman Empire, at its zenith, was the undisputed master of the Western world. Its power rested not just on its legions and its roads, but on a piece of silver, the denarius. For centuries, the denarius was the global reserve currency of its time. It was trusted, stable, and nearly pure silver. Roman soldiers were paid in it, merchants across the Mediterranean demanded it, and ordinary citizens stored their wealth in it. It was confidence in metal form. But running an empire is expensive. Financing legions to defend vast borders against Germanic tribes, building magnificent infrastructure, and managing internal unrest all required unimaginable wealth. And as tax revenues failed to keep pace with military costs, the emperors were faced with a choice. Raise taxes openly, a politically explosive move, or turn to an age-old, silent and insidious trick. The trick was currency debasement. Instead of asking citizens for more money, emperors quietly began reducing the silver content in the denarius and substituting it with cheaper base metals like copper. The coin looked the same on the surface, maybe just a thin wash of silver on top. The government could then mint more coins from the same amount of silver, effectively creating money out of thin air to pay their bills. This was not just a historical curiosity. It was the mechanism of the empire's destruction. Under Emperor Augustus, the denarius was nearly pure. By the 3rd century, it was barely 5% silver. By the time the crisis truly hit, the currency that had once been the envy of the world was functionally worthless. What followed was the textbook definition of inflation, a silent tax that ravaged the lives of every Roman citizen. Savings evaporated. Wages paid in the debased currency couldn't keep up with the soaring prices for grain and bread. Merchants stopped accepting the coins, demanding payment in actual silver, gold, or barter. Trade broke down. Confidence dissolved. Contracts failed. The armies paid in worthless money, lost their loyalty, and the government lost its legitimacy. Barbarians at the gate may have delivered the final blow, but the real killer was the debased currency inside the imperial treasury. The U.S. financial system is currently engaged in the exact same practice, only instead of physically mixing silver with copper, we are leveraging the global reserve status of the dollar and the digital power of the keyboard to create trillions of dollars with a keystroke. We call it quantitative easing, deficit spending, or necessary stimulus. But it is simply the modern, highly sophisticated version of Roman debasement. It is the ancient mistake. And the $34 trillion debt is the public balance sheet of that catastrophic historical repetition. The financial anxiety you feel when you pay for groceries or fill up your car is not a coincidence. It is the inevitable tax of the debasement process, eroding the value of the very dollar you earn. We must ask, if the most stable currency in human history could be destroyed by a few centuries of financial trickery, what makes the US dollar, backed by nothing but faith and debt, any different? The answer is nothing. The cycle is accelerating. The first mistake was currency debasement. The second, and arguably more deadly, was the deliberate decision to transform debt from a finite concept into an infinite one. This transformation is the core reason the $34 trillion problem exists, and it is a distinctly American invention that perfected the Roman trick and packaged it for the modern era. We often focus on wars, political scandals, or market crashes, but the true financial history of the last 50 years revolves around a single, quiet revolution that took place on August 15, 1971. Before that date, the US dollar was still tethered, however loosely, to gold. The system, established after World War II at the Bretton Woods Conference, allowed foreign central banks to exchange their dollars for a fixed amount of gold. This gold standard, or even the partial gold standard of the post-war era, acted as a governor on government spending. Gold reserves were finite. You could not just print endlessly without losing the trust of your creditors, forcing nations to manage their budgets with some degree of fiscal reality. When President Nixon unilaterally closed the gold window in 1971, that governor was removed. The dollar became a pure fiat currency, backed by nothing but the full faith and credit of the US government. This seemingly technical move was the moment debt transformed from something finite into something potentially infinite. With gold out of the picture, central banks gained the power to create money without any direct consequence or metal reserve tying their hands. This allowed the US to run massive, sustained trade deficits and finance a massive, sustained debt without the traditional checks and balances kicking in. It was a license to print, wrapped in the political convenience of not having to raise taxes on an already taxed population. The government discovered the politicians' favorite trick: borrowing buys time. Raising taxes engages voters, cutting spending engages even more. Borrowing, however, is silent and shifts the payment burden onto the future, where the current politicians will be long gone. This strategic shift from fiscal responsibility to perpetual debt is the foundation of the $34 trillion crisis. The system works because the US dollar is the world's primary reserve currency. Nations need dollars to trade oil, raw materials, and manufactured goods. This creates guaranteed global demand for US debt, allowing the US government to borrow at artificially low rates. This exorbitant privilege is a massive subsidy paid by the rest of the world to the US political elite. It is the financial superstructure built upon the ancient mistake. The debasement is no longer just for financing wars. It is for financing everything: an ever-expanding welfare state, a massive military footprint across the globe, perpetual bailouts for failing institutions, and unprecedented fiscal stimulus. Every time the Federal Reserve creates new money to finance this debt, it achieves the same result as the Roman emperor clipping the silver from the denarius. It dilutes the value of every existing dollar. The government loves inflation precisely because it reduces the real value of its outstanding debt. It is the ultimate hidden tax, a silent transfer of wealth from citizens and savers to the state. When the government prints, the prices you pay at the gas pump and the grocery store go up. The purchasing power of the dollar you saved is stolen slowly but surely by policy. This is the modern genius of the mistake. The US doesn't need to physically invade your home to seize your wealth. They simply dilute the currency you hold. The great irony is that this debt-fueled engine, which was supposed to secure the American century, is now the ultimate weakness that threatens to collapse it. We are now entering the phase of the imperial debt cycle where interest payments alone become the dominant force. As the debt has ballooned to $34 trillion, the cost of servicing that debt, just the interest, has become one of the largest line items in the entire federal budget, rivaling or even exceeding spending on defense or Medicare. This forces a terrible feedback loop. To pay the interest on the debt, the government must borrow even more money, accelerating the cycle toward its breaking point. This is the moment in the historical pattern where the system cracks. The US is facing a choice between politically unpalatable austerity, an outright disastrous default, or the continuation of the current path, printing more money, leading to a catastrophic loss of faith in the dollar and hyperinflation. The historical pattern is clear. Debt builds, leaders deny, and then the reckoning arrives. The current $34 trillion is not merely a bookkeeping problem. It represents the final, dangerous stage where a great empire's financial integrity is sacrificed for political convenience. This phase is characterized by two critical events: the loss of trust in the currency and the erosion of the global reserve status. When a currency loses trust, it is not a sudden drop. It is a creeping decay, a subtle loss of faith that eventually accelerates into panic. This process happened to the denarius in Rome, to the solidus in Byzantium, and to currencies across failed states for centuries. The reckoning will be paid through inflation, the silent tax. For the US public, the reckoning means the cost of living crisis is not a temporary anomaly, but a structural, permanent feature of a debt-soaked economy. Retirement savings, pensions, and fixed incomes become casualties, robbed of their future purchasing power by a policy decision to print rather than to pay. The consequences are immense: a generational transfer of wealth upward, where those who hold debt-based assets and hard assets thrive, while those who hold cash and depend on wages are impoverished. The final step in this imperial cycle is the erosion of the dollar's global reserve status. As US debt explodes and weaponization of the dollar through sanctions becomes commonplace, major trading blocs and rival nations are actively seeking alternatives. When the world no longer needs the dollar to trade, the massive foreign demand for US debt will collapse. Interest rates will skyrocket. The US government will be forced to choose between massive austerity, a political impossibility, or printing money on a scale that turns today's inflation into tomorrow's hyperinflation. This is the inevitable reset, but history also offers a playbook for survival. The survivors of these financial collapses, whether in ancient Rome, Weimar Germany, or modern-day Lebanon, were not the ones who trusted the system the most. They were the ones who doubted first and acted accordingly. You cannot depend on governments or banks to save your financial future, because the system is designed to profit from your indebtedness and reliance. True wealth is not found in the paper promises of the state.